Welcome everybody. My name, as you see it on the screen there, is Kevin Bosher, and this particular session is talking about a new standard, a new ISO standard, 30415, diversity and inclusion. And I'm just going to give you an overview of this particular standard and the journey to get to where we are, which is the status is now that this has been adopted in the UK. The reason that I've able to sort of give you a bit of an overview, the sort of behind the scenes piece, is because I was on the committee that developed this particular ISO. So some housekeeping. There is a question and answer box that you will be able to type your questions into. If you do that for me, please, and then at the end of the session, then there's a time for me to be able to reply. We definitely want to hear your views on this session as to the value of it and whether the content serviced your needs. So we'll give you the options of providing your feedback at the very end of the session. Now, the slides that you're going to see will be made available, and a recording of the webinar will also be placed on the FIR program website by the Sustainability Supply Chain School. Now, if you have any technical difficulties as we're delivering the webinar, there is a phone number there that would allow you to dial in. So I'd encourage you to perhaps take a quick snap of that or quickly write that phone number down. If you get thrown out and you want to rejoin by phone, then you can do it using that information. So I'll just pause a second to allow you to do that. Okay, so ISO 30415. I'm just going to start off by talking about diversity and inclusion in organizations, which basically is the rationale for why ISO developed this new standard. And also, I think, why you have probably come across other standards, other frameworks, that it's clear to the providers of these standards and frameworks that organizations are really sort of asking internally and externally, diversity and inclusion, what do we need to do? And who do we ask? Where do we get the right answers from? You know, what is the best way forward? And they're doing that in a situation where workplace cultures, because there is greater diversity, undoubtedly our census figures show that there's a greater diversity, particularly in the UK, that these workplace cultures are driven and impacted by different cultural beliefs, traditions, the ways that people do things and the way people work. And some of those may be different internationally, and people will come with different traditions, religious beliefs, and there will be differing religious beliefs. And sometimes they come up against each other and may cause friction. And there's also a definite potential for people who are different perhaps in a minority group or different from the main group to be stigmatized, to be viewed differently and treated differently. In addition, organizations are asking, how do they manage external impacts? For example, what about customers? If our customer base is diverse, do we not need to think about the products that we're developing and have a business opportunity by creating products and services that meet a wider market? That would make sense. What about clients? Some clients are asking for capability around diversity and inclusion because they will also want to be able to prove to their stakeholders that they're working with organizations who are fit for purpose. And there are other key stakeholders, governments, legislative bodies, licensing bodies, and of course the workforce. So all of those things are suggesting that organizations are in need of something that can help them. So why a particular international standard? Well, diversity and inclusion is now a global issue. And of course, some organizations operate globally. Some of the bigger construction organizations, for example, my own, MACE, is a global organization and is therefore operating in different contexts. And it's clear that organizations don't necessarily seem to understand the big issues as they arise. For example, the response to the situation with the Black Lives Matter movement and confusion with the Black Lives Matter organization and the aims of that organization, but against the movement, which was clearly to identify the impact of society on Black people. And risks and opportunities are not always identified. For example, I just explained the opportunities that come with having a wide product base or service base, understanding different markets, and risks associated with, for example, not having clarity around the way to manage conflict in the workplace or friction with other stakeholders. It's also true that terminology is inconsistent. Some organizations refer to equality, diversity, and inclusion, EDI, some just diversity inclusion. Some are now talking about inclusion and diversity. And some people are now referencing equity instead of equality. So there's a great deal of inconsistency in terms of terminology. And I would suggest that means that organizations don't necessarily know what actions to take. These are the factors, historic factors, that have led to ISO thinking we need an international standard. Just something about ISO. It's an organization based in Switzerland. You can see the picture of the globe there. The blue colors are organizations that are members. The orange ones are correspondent members, so they sort of align with ISO. And you can see from the map of the world, there are very few countries that are not connected with ISO. And what about ISO standards per se then? So if something is identified for an ISO standard, it recognizes the importance of that topic. Hence, diversity and inclusion being recognized as an important topic in today's society. And these standards provide practical advice and guidance. So they are very much meant for organizations to adopt and use. They have to be written in a particular format because it has to be readable and understandable for all levels of experience. It would be no use if the language was purely technical and illegible. So they have to be usable for all levels of experience. And they also have to be suitable for all types of organization. So it's not only for big corporates, it's for SMEs located in countries across the world. It doesn't matter what sector they're in or how long they've been involved in engaged with a particular topic. This is the rationale for ISO standards. So in addition, ISO standards align with the United Nations Sustainability Goals. Now, on the image on the right, you can see that you may be able to read that there are 17 current sustainability goals. There is a link within the slides to more information on these. But of particular relevance is number 5, which deals with gender equality. Number 8, which is about decent work. And number 10, which is about reduced inequalities. And ISO 3415 was written and referenced in relation to these particular UN sustainability goals. Because if organizations are seeking to deliver on these UN sustainability goals, then clearly for ISO, it makes sense to say this standard can help you achieve them. The other thing about international standard organization standards is that they have to be internationally agreed. It would be no use if, say, the UK developed a standard and said, well, this is fine for us, we want this to be an ISO, because if it wasn't relevant for other international contexts, then it would be of no use to the other countries. So they have to be agreed internationally in order to be adopted by ISO or approved by ISO. So there's a suite of standards that 30415 sits under. This is in a suite 30400, which are human resource management standards. This would suggest that ISO views diversity and inclusion as an HR only concept, but in reality, 30415 deliberately goes beyond the HR life cycle, and I'll say more about that in a second. But other standards under this suite include, as you can see on the screen, 30401 knowledge management systems down to 30414 human resource management reporting. So there are standards in these other areas that also have to align with 30415, and 30415 has to align with 30401, for example. Okay, what about the journey then that's led us to the point where 30415 has been adopted by the UK? Now, this commenced with a plenary session in Singapore in 2017. And no, I wasn't there. I was involved virtually at that stage. And whilst there have been many meetings in some fairly fantastic locations across the world, my own international travel has only been to Europe, to Milan and Paris in particular. But other sessions have been held, and I've dialed in and taken part virtually. So as it says, there were other sessions across the globe, but of course all this came to an end when COVID came along. And so from March 2020 to November 2020, in order to finish the standard, there were weekly virtual sessions with different time zones. So for me, that meant sometimes getting up early, sometimes staying late at night, and sometimes, fortunately, being available at sort of lunch times. But they were operating on 3 sessions a week, with the experts or the committee members all dialing in to contribute. Now, this led in November 2020 to a final draft being submitted. So it took 3 years to develop and gain consensus from people from across the world being involved. And the UK adopted 30415 in February 2021. Now, there already was a UK standard. You may or may not be aware, but British Standard 76005, diversity and inclusion, had actually been launched in 2017. So it's not been around that long, but the UK commonly, whenever there's an ISO standard, adopts the ISO standard. And that is what's happened to this standard. So BS 76005 has actually been replaced only 3 years after launch, but it remains in use until May 2023, because some organizations will have bought that standard and used it to develop their own internal approaches, and therefore it was felt it would be unfair to just stop it and withdraw it straight away. So both BS 76005 and ISO 30415 exist in the UK at this time, although you can't now buy BS 76005 as a new approach. You would have had to already have it and be using it. So, okay, what about ISO 30415? Well, the image on the right is a sort of draft of a model that was put together for the standard to try and explain to users what the scope of the standard. And you'll see that it adopts this global approach with what are called diversity and inclusion prerequisites at the top or sort of around the globe to sort of suggest that these are a key element of the journey in going forward with this standard. And at the bottom, you'll see outside the globe, the concept of the organizational context also being a factor in terms of what you can adopt and what you can't adopt from the standard. And then very much ISO standards they all operate on this idea of that you plan something, you do something, you check and you review something, and that leads you to making amendments or continuing with a continuous improvement cycle. And the jigsaw puzzle elements within the globe are the chapters within the standard or clauses within the standard that in which you can find information and guidance. Now, this is a bit busy, but I think it's a clearer representation of what's covered by 30415, and it comes from an organization called Inclusion Corps, an American organization whose link is provided at the end of these slides. Now, they have developed a toolkit that can be used alongside 30415 to measure progress. So they've seen an immediate commercial advantage. But effectively, this model explains the structure of 30415, and the bottom left of the circle on the left, you can see human resources life cycle, and that is further divided on the right-hand side circle, because within the standard, the human resources life cycle is further broken down into these areas, starting off with workforce planning, working all the way around to transition and redeployment. So the sort of getting in, getting on, and getting out of an organization. Now, another element of ISO standards is the language that's used within them. So I talked about different inconsistencies around language. Now, of course, ISO standards all use the same language. So, for example, the definition of diversity comes from a 2016 standard issued by ISO, and 30415 adopted that definition. Some new definitions were created for 30415, which future standards will now have to adopt. So, for example, the definition of inclusion is now set within ISO and was developed within 30415. There's also no reference to specific legislation, because if you can think about it, that's going to be impossible to cover all the legislation there is across all of the countries in the world. So the standard merely states that specific legislation or national legislation is something that organizations need to take account of, but it's not referenced within the standard because it recognizes different national contexts. But the structure of the standard is the same as across all recognized standards. So those of you who are familiar with ISO 9001, 14001, or 45001, or any ISO standards, the structure will be exactly the same. There is, however, a slight difference between what are called system standards and guidance standards, and ISO 30415 is a guidance standard. The difference, probably easiest to explain, is that if you think of ISO 9001, which is a system standard, organizations seek accreditation to prove that they are meeting that standard. And many organizations will promote and communicate the fact that they are accredited to all three of those management standards shown there, 9001, etc. But for ISO 30415, it was not designed that people would seek accreditation It was more that people would adopt it and adopt the guidance that it contains. But I do know, for example, the Inclusion Corps, the American company I referred to, are looking as a commercial venture to be able to show, to be able to give organizations some proof that they have achieved a particular level of 30415. And I believe that there are organizations in the UK who currently do the same for BS 76005, who may also offer some form of recognition or accreditation. But ISO 30415 was never designed to be an accreditation standard. It was only meant to be a guidance standard. There's some key elements then in 30415 that I just want to sort of bring to your attention. First of all, the standard suggests that there are fundamental prerequisites that organizations need to develop or to have in place in order to make best use of the guidance. So these range from things like an expectations that organizations will actually recognize diversity, you know, that they won't have a closed mind to the concept of diversity, that they will be effectively governed. So you'll have efficient structures in place, leadership structures that actually allow you to operate effectively. And sort of acting accountably, you know, that you operate as a business in an ethical and socially responsible manner, that you've got intentions to meet UN sustainability goals, for example, and that your working environment is inclusive, or you're working towards creating an inclusive environment, that you communicate inclusively, so you provide different formats, different language, different translations where needed. And lastly, that you advocate or champion diversity and inclusion. So you're active in terms of taking the guidance forward. So the standard basically explains at the beginning that unless you have these prerequisites or are working or are content to work towards putting them in place, the guidance is almost undeliverable. Thereafter, the main sort of elements of the standard are about organizational governance and structure. So what do you need to have in place in order to make the whole thing workable? And that includes leadership, commitment, identifying responsibilities at different levels, having the right policies, processes, and practices in place, and talking about the human resource life cycle. And I sort of went through that big circle with you. It's about attraction to exit, so the whole getting in, getting on, and getting out. I referenced the organizational context, which is part of the model, and that's also a sort of internal and external basis. So where is the organization located? Where does it operate? In what sector, etc. And interestingly, because although this sits within a human resource management suite of standards, there is a strong emphasis on the needs and expectations of stakeholders, including supply chain relationships. So around procurement, supplier diversity, etc., which wouldn't ordinarily sit within an HR suite of standards. So those are the key elements of ISO 30415. And then some guidance on how to begin, really, making sure you have the leadership and management commitment to take the standard forward in place. You definitely need active people participation and take account of diversity, so make that participation representational. Clearly, you wouldn't seek to exclude groups from going forward. Think about the risks and opportunities that exist. So maybe carry out a SWOT analysis, that's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Consider training and information. Look to implement the guidance in 30415. Review, monitor, and measure progress, because this is about continual improvement, which requires you to evaluate your performance. So look at your measures. How are you progressing or not? Where are you not progressing? Review your approach, adapt your approach, and continually follow this circle of continuous improvement. So finally, where can you find out more? There's some links here that you will be able to follow. First of all, to the British Standards Institute, because if you want to adopt 30415, you will need to source it through, in the UK, through BSI. There is a link to ISO's own page around ISO 30415. And lastly, there's a link to Inclusion Core, which is the organization I refer to in America, who are providing this technical IT-based tool that allows you to adopt the standard and measure progress by inputting information and it telling you effectively where you are on the journey. But it's a commercial piece, and therefore there's going to be a cost element for you. But you can look at the page for free and get a view as to whether the standard and the toolkit is of use. So we're now at the question stage, and I'm just going to go into the question box and an opportunity now for you to ask questions if you want to type them into the question and answer box. So Holly, nice to hear from you, and congratulations on your recent move. Yeah, the standard is now live. It's live as of February in the UK. So yep, definitely you can adopt it. I think cost-wise, it's around £150 mark, but don't quote me on that. If you go to the BSI link in the slides, you'll find it. From Matt, what are the names of the organizations that can accredit you? I think the best thing to do, Matt, is either to visit the Inclusion Core link on the slides or the BSI link on the slides, and you will see information on the organizations that are able to give you an accreditation as such against this standard. Although, as I said, it was never designed for accreditation, it was meant for guidance. So any accreditation will be a commercial relationship between you and the organization that is accrediting you. So Sophia, accreditation is not currently available. It's not offered as part of ISO in the same way that 9001, etc. are, but I am aware of, first of all, Inclusion Core in the States and another UK organization that I think you can access through BSI, who may be able to give you accreditation. Are there examples of companies in the UK adopting this already? I'm afraid I'm unable to give you that information. It's a really good question. I'm not sure whether BSI, the web page for BSI, would be able to tell you, but as it's so new, it's all they would be able to tell you is organizations that have bought it, not necessarily those that are implementing it. Is there a goal to have more global sustainability accreditation in the future, including other UN goals? Well, I've included in the slides a link to the UN sustainability goals. The current ones, I believe, are in place until 2023, and I think there are a different suite that they're looking to put out to cover up to 2030. It's an ever-evolving feast. So the best thing to do, I think, is for that particular question is to look at the UN Sustainability Goals site that I've included. So Marion, would having the certificate add value, or if the organization is already champion EDI, that would be enough? That's a really good question. Clearly, I think organizations are looking for something that they can demonstrate to clients or to stakeholders to show that they are champion EDI and that they are achieving a particular level, a recognized level of competence. So if someone is able to independently assess your organization using this standard and provide you with a certificate or some accreditation, I would suggest that that probably would be of value. And if you were to be one of the first to adopt 30415 and have someone say that you have met the requirements of the standard, again, I think that would give you a potentially positive business benefit. But I really think that that's a commercial thing, the decision for you. I'm not going to recommend any particular accreditation or recommend accreditation. All I can say is I think that clearly some organizations would find value, and some clients may ask you, what you're doing, and if you could demonstrate in some way, then it might be of value to you. This would be good to recommend to SMEs from Holly, as cost is low, as opposed to more costly EDI accreditation. That's a good point, Holly, because remember, I said at the beginning that these ISO standards are meant for organizations of all sizes. So the cost is relatively cheap, but I don't know about the cost of the independent accreditation. So that may add additional costs, but if the whole piece is aimed at organizations of all sizes, including SMEs, then hopefully that cost would, as you say, be smaller than the cost of engaging with some of the other frameworks that already exist. Who is monitoring the commercial companies who are offering accreditation to ensure they're of value comparable? Well, if any are offered by BSI, then they have to meet a strict criteria and achieve approval from BSI in order to be able to show that they are fit for purpose. And I think that's a regular review. So for BSI adopted standards like ISO 30415, it would be BSI. Look, Harry has found the Centre for Assessment already offering certification in it. So there you go. Thanks, Harry. I wasn't aware of that. I just knew of a body. I didn't know who it was, and you've clearly found out for me, so I'm grateful. Well, that looks like the end of the questions. You can always follow up with me if you have a particular question that you'd like, you'd like to approach me with. You can contact me through the supply chain school. So I think what I'll do now then is just move on to the end of the presentation. Now, as I said at the beginning, we're really keen to understand your views and your feedback on these sessions. So you'll have two ways of doing that. Sarah is going to put a link into the question and answer box, and we would very much welcome you. It only takes 2 or 3 minutes to give us feedback. So if you could capture that link, that's a real positive. But the other thing that will happen is that when we close the Zoom session, you should be automatically taken to a feedback link, a feedback page that will allow you to give feedback as well. So you'll have a choice, either go through the link a bit later, or as Sarah closes down the Zoom, you will be taken to a page that allows you to do it. So all it leaves me to do is say thank you for coming. I'm hoping that you found it of some use. I've learned something, So that's always a positive, because I've now found out this the company that's offering assessment against 30415, and I hope you learned something new too, and hopefully see you around sometime soon. So thank you very much.